Could my own brother be capable of devastating betrayal? The truth left me broken and furious. I can still hear the laughter. Not the kind that warms the room, but the kind that cuts you open because you know it's not meant for you. It was Christmas Eve last year, the last time I set foot in my father's house, and I walked into the living room to find my half-brother, Ian, handing out envelopes to everyone. Thick envelopes. The kind that bulged with money. My younger sister, Emily, squealed when she opened hers. 10 grand. Oh my God, Ian, are you serious? My father chuckled proudly, patting Ian on the back. Always taking care of family, just like I raised him. I was standing in the doorway, waiting, clutching the bottle of cheap wine I'd bought with the last of my paycheck. My heart was hammering because some sick part of me still thought maybe this year would be different. Maybe Ian had finally decided to see me, to acknowledge me. He turned, noticed me standing there, and his smile evaporated. He didn't hand me an envelope. He didn't hand me anything. Instead, he smirked. Well, you made it. That's all. 3 words. Like I was some unwelcome guest at my own father's family gathering. My throat burned. What about me? I asked before I could stop myself. My voice cracked and the entire room went silent. My stepmother shifted uncomfortably. Emily looked at the floor. My dad just sighed like I was an inconvenience. Ian tilted his head, that smug grin spreading. What about you? What would you even do with 10 grand? Blur it on rent, groceries, maybe finally get a car that isn't falling apart. He laughed, and the others hesitant at first joined in. My stomach twisted. I felt every eye in the room on me, watching me shrivel, waiting for me to either explode or disappear. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the wine. You think this is funny? I whispered. Ian stepped closer, towering over me, his voice dripping venom. What's funny is that you've been a leech since the day you were born. Dad had to put food in your mouth when Mom bailed. He gave you a roof, didn't he? Meanwhile, I busted my ass, and guess what? I made something of myself. You were just nothing. Always have been. That word nothing hit me like a fist to the chest. My face burned hot, but my entire body went cold at the same time. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, drowning out the muffled sounds of the fire crackling and Emily's awkward cough. I wanted to scream, to lunge at him, to tell him everything I had bottled up for decades, that I wasn't worthless, that I had survived things none of them even knew about. That the only reason I was broken was because I'd been treated like trash my whole childhood while Ian was handed everything. But I couldn't speak. My throat locked up and tears stung my eyes. Ian leaned in closer, so only I could hear. Face it, you were a mistake. That's why Mom left, and that's why you'll always be on the outside. Something in me snapped. The wine bottle slipped from my hand and shattered on the hardwood floor, glass skittering across the room. The sharp pop made everyone jump. Jesus, what's wrong with you? My father barked, but he didn't sound concerned. He sounded angry, like I had ruined the evening. I looked at the mess on the floor, then at Ian's smug face, and finally at my father's cold, indifferent eyes. And in that moment, I realized the truth. It wasn't just Ian. It was all of them. They had never seen me as family. Not once. I was shaking so violently I thought I might collapse. My chest felt like it was caving in. I turned and stumbled out the front door into the freezing night air, shards of glass still clinging to my shoes. I could hear Ian's voice behind me, mocking. Run away, like you always do. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The night swallowed me whole, and as I walked down that dark street alone, I knew something inside me had broken for good. But I didn't know then just how deep Ian's cruelty really went or how far he'd go to make sure I never escaped the shadow of being nothing. I grew up believing that love was something you had to earn. Maybe that's why Ian's words got so deep, because they weren't just insults flung at a holiday gathering. They were the culmination of a lifetime where he always won, and I was always the loser. My earliest memory of him is from when I was about 5. We were both sitting at the kitchen table. Ian had a shiny new set of Legos, boxes stacked so high they nearly toppled over. My father clapped him on the shoulder and said, That's my boy, build something great. I had a single-hand me-down action figure with one arm missing. I remember holding it tight, staring at Ian's mountain of toys, and asking, Can I have some too? My stepmother laughed not kindly, but like I told the joke. You know those aren't for you, go play outside. So I did. Alone. Always alone. When I was 9, I started noticing how different things were between us. Ian got braces, piano lessons, summer camps. I got told to be grateful when my shoes had holes in them. I asked my dad once why Ian got so much more. He didn't even look up from his paper when he said, because he deserves it, he earns it, you just don't. That line branded itself into my skull. You don't deserve it. But here's the part that really screws with my head. Despite everything, I wanted Ian to like me. I wanted to believe he was my brother, that maybe behind the taunts and smug grins, there was someone who cared. When I was 12, I scraped together change from couch cushions to buy a used baseball glove from a yard sale. I ran to show Ian, excited, hoping he'd toss a ball with me. He looked at it, then at me, and sneered. That thing's trash, don't embarrass me. He tossed it in the trash bin and walked away. Still, I kept chasing his approval. High school was when it became unbearable. Ian was a golden boy varsity athlete, straight A student, always polished and confident. Teachers adored him, neighbours bragged about him, and my father beamed whenever his name was mentioned. Me? I was the kid with hand-me-down clothes 2 sizes too big, the one working part-time at the grocery store to pay for my own lunch money. I developed stomach ulcers from stress by the time I was 16. When I begged my dad to take me to a doctor, he said, Stop being dramatic, you're fine. I wasn't fine. There were so many red flags, but I kept ignoring them, telling myself maybe one day things would even out. That maybe my dad and Ian would finally see I wasn't worthless. One memory still haunts me. Senior year, awards night. Ian was called up half a dozen times academic, athletic, leadership awards. One day on scholarships. My father practically jumped out of his seat to clap, tears in his eyes. I didn't get called once. At the end, my father leaned over and muttered, "See the difference between you two? Maybe if you worked harder, you'd be up there too." I bit my lip so hard it bled. When I turned 18, I left home as fast as I could. I thought distance would protect me, that if I built a life on my own terms, I could finally stop bleeding from wounds they'd inflicted. But life wasn't kind. Without financial help, without a safety net, I stumbled constantly. Rent, food, tuition, it all crushed me. I watched from afar as Ian thrived, starting his own business with a little help from Dad. I told myself I was free. But the truth, I was still chained. Every phone call from home reminded me I was the afterthought. Every holiday invitation felt like a test I was doomed to fail. And then, years later, when I thought maybe I'd built up enough resilience, I discovered something that made all the old scars rip open again. Something that proved Ian hadn't just been cruel as a brother, he'd been actively working to destroy me. It started with a voicemail I wasn't meant to hear. I still remember the day I found out. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't gentle and veiling. It was like someone had ripped the lid off my life and dumped every betrayal I'd endured onto the floor. I was at my apartment, trying to sort through old documents for taxes, when I stumbled across an email thread that shouldn't have existed. It was from Ian, but it wasn't just Ian bragging or taunting me like he always did. This was different. Malicious. Calculated. The subject line read, "Plan to keep him out of everything." I froze. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my laptop. The emails detailed how Ian had intercepted my college financial aid, how he'd convinced my father to withdraw support for anything I tried to do, how he'd manipulated mutual friends into keeping me isolated. Every job I lost, every opportunity I missed, it wasn't just bad luck. It was orchestrated. Every struggle, every humiliation, every lonely Christmas, every time I thought I was finally being seen, it was engineered. And that wasn't all. There were scan checks and bank statements showing that my father's gifts to me had been routed to Ian's accounts. Even the small inheritance my mother had left me. Diverted. Ian had been siphoning my life savings since the day I left home. I remember collapsing onto my couch, my face wet with tears and sweat, my chest aching as if it had been stomped on. My phone rang. It was my childhood friend, Kevin. "Hey, man, are you okay? You sound off." I couldn't even speak. I just sent him a picture of the email. His reply was instantaneous. "Dude, this is unreal. He's been gaslighting you your whole life." And real didn't even begin to cover it. My worth, everything I thought I understood about my family was gone. Gone like smoke in the wind. Every Christmas, every birthday, every moment I'd endured with the twisted hope that maybe, just maybe, Ian had a shred of decency, it had been a lie. I started digging deeper. Tax returns. Bank statements. Old letters. And the more I found, the more brutal it got. Ian had been systematically erasing me from the family narrative. He forged letters to colleges claiming I had financial problems, lied to landlords, even contacted former bosses pretending to be my father to disparage me. Every door I knocked on, every opportunity I reached for, he had a hand in shutting it. The psychological toll was immediate. My stomach churned, bile rising with every document. My hands shook so violently I couldn't even light a cigarette. For hours, I just sat there, staring at the emails, reading lines I could hardly believe were real. And then, as if fate wanted to add insult to injury, my phone pinged again. A message from Emily. "Did you hear? Ian's donating another 10 grand to the community centre. Everyone's so proud of him." I threw the phone across the room. The sound of it shattering on the hardwood mirrored how I felt inside. Broken. Invisible. Erased. I couldn't believe that the people who were supposed to love me, the ones I thought might see me, one day had been complicit. My father, my stepmother, even Emily in her blind admiration for Ian. They had all been deceived, manipulated, or willingly ignored what he was doing. I realised then that my entire family had become his army, wittingly or not. I remember standing in the middle of my apartment, shivering, staring at the ceiling, and feeling rage boil up. Not the polite, manageable anger I had sometimes let out in therapy. No, this was volcanic, gut-wrenching, paralysing fury. I thought about confronting him immediately, but even as the thought formed, I knew it wouldn't be simple. Ian had always been 2 steps ahead, charming, calculating, untouchable. But now I had the proof. Now I had the ammunition. Something inside me shifted in that moment. The helpless kid who had spent decades yearning for approval. Gone. Replaced by someone who knew exactly who had ruined his life and who was about to make sure the world saw it too. But before I could act, I had to process it. I had to strategize. One misstep, and he could bury me again. One wrong move, and everything I uncovered could be dismissed as delusional. And that's when I realized the fight wasn't just about money, recognition, or revenge. It was about exposing the truth of a lifetime of cruelty. It was about showing the world the monster my half-brother really was. And I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again, not my family, not my sense of safety, not even myself. The day I confronted Ian is burned into my memory like fire on skin. I didn't go in blindly. I had every document, every email, every manipulated bank statement printed and organised. I wanted him to feel it, to understand the full weight of his betrayal. I walked into his office that morning, my hands trembling but my jaw locked. Ian looked up from his desk, casually sipping his coffee, that same infuriating smirk plastered across his face. "Hey, little brother," he said, his tone dripping condescension. "What's wrong? Come to beg for forgiveness." I slammed the folder down on his desk so hard the paper skidded across the polished wood. "This," I spat, for shaking, "is the truth about you." Ian raised an eyebrow, feigning ignorance. "Oh, then what's that supposed to mean?" I opened the folder and began reading aloud. Every email, every bank statement, every forged letter. I watched his smirk falter just for a moment, but only slightly. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, and said, "You really think I'm going to apologize for being smarter than you? You're a monster." I yelled. "You ruined my life. Every opportunity, every chance I had, you stole it. You lied to everyone, manipulated Dad, everyone you could touch." My voice cracked, and tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't stop. "You made me nothing, Ian, nothing." For the first time, his eyes flashed something real fear, maybe, or anger. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me?" he snapped. "I've built a life, a reputation. You're just a sad, broke kid trying to play hero." "I'm not a kid," I shouted, stepping closer. "I'm John Hiding, I have proof, and you're going to pay for everything." That when the first cracks of the showdown appeared. Ian lunged for the folder, trying to snatch it. I pulled back, and papers flew across the office like confetti of my ruined childhood. He shoved me hard. I stumbled, but stayed standing. The tension was unbearable. I could feel the adrenaline in my veins, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. We shouted, our voices echoing off the walls, attracting the attention of his assistant and a few colleagues. Someone called security. By then, Ian's mask had completely fallen. He wasn't the charming, untouchable brother anymore. He was raw anger, exposed cruelty. When security arrived, I didn't back down. I handed the folder to them, making sure every shred of evidence was visible. Ian protested, calling me a liar, claiming defamation. But security, reading the emails and statements, looked as horrified as I felt. The fallout didn't stop there. I contacted a lawyer immediately. Within days, legal proceedings began: embezzlement, fraud, manipulation of inheritance. My father, previously indifferent, finally saw the truth lay bare. The look on his face when confronted by the irrefutable evidence was one I will never forget: shock, shame, and the faintest glimmer of regret. Emily tried to side with Ian at first, disbelief colouring her voice. I can't believe you do this to him," she stammered to me. But when she read the documents herself, the realization hit her like a freight train. She didn't know whether to cry or run. By the end of the month, Ian's carefully constructed empire began to crumble. Bank accounts frozen, community donations halted, legal restrictions placed on his business dealings. His friends, who had once admired him blindly, now recoiled as the extent of his deception became public. Even social media turned against him, sharing the story of the brother who had been systematically destroyed. The psychological impact on Ian was immediate. I watched the man who had tormented me for decades shrink under the weight of exposure. There was no smirk, no arrogance, just the hollow, cold stare of someone who realized they were finally cornered. For me, the confrontation was both cathartic and horrifying. I didn't expect the flood of memories, the sudden anger that made my hand shake, my chest tighten. I cried in the lawyer's office after everything was filed, exhausted, raw, and trembling. But I also felt something else: power. Control over my story. For the first time, I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor taking back what was mine. That day, everything changed, not just for Ian, but for me. My family, our community, even my own perception of who I was capable of being all of it shifted. Ian's betrayal had been savage, systematic, and devastating. But confronting him, exposing him, and seeing the consequences unfold, that was the first step toward reclaiming my life. The weeks after Ian's exposure were surreal. The chaos of confrontation and legal fallout slowly gave way to a silence I hadn't known since childhood, a silence that was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time, I didn't have to hide from my own life. I started therapy immediately. My therapist, Dr. Race, didn't flinch when I described decades of neglect, manipulation, and systematic betrayal. "You've survived calculated cruelty," she said. "That's not nothing." I had always believed I was worthless, but in therapy I began to confront the truth. Ian's cruelty wasn't a reflection of my value. It was a reflection of his character and my survival. Slowly, piece by piece, I learned to disentangle my self-worth from the way I'd been treated. I took small but deliberate steps toward rebuilding. I opened a bank account in my own name, far away from Ian's reach. I signed up for a writing class, something I'd always wanted to do but never dared. Every time I accomplished something, even something minor, I felt the weight of decades lift, just a little. Family relationships were more complicated. My father, broken and remorseful, attempted to reconnect. Some days it felt sincere, other days the old patterns of denial and indifference threatened to creep back. Emmy reached out after weeks of silence. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner," she said, tears streaming down her face during our first in-person meeting. I wanted to hug her, but I kept a cautious distance. Trust had to be earned. The legal proceedings dragged on longer than I expected. Ian fought tooth and nail, but the evidence was undeniable. Eventually, the court ruled in my favour: restitution, restrictions on his business dealings, and mandatory financial oversight. Justice wasn't complete. There was no way to erase the years of pain, but it was tangible proof that I had survived, that my story mattered. The emotional scars, however, were still raw. Nightmares haunted me for months. I would wake, heart racing, imagining Ian's smirk, his words echoing in my ears. But each time, I reminded myself he no longer controlled my life. I was awake, alive, and reclaiming what had been stolen. I also found an unexpected source of strength in helping others. I started volunteering with a support network for people recovering from family abuse. Sharing my story, hearing others' stories, and helping them navigate their trauma reminded me that survival isn't just personal, it's communal. There is power in the shared human experience of pain and healing. One of the most profound changes was in my own self-perception. I learned to set boundaries firmly without guilt. I stopped seeking validation from people who had never had my best interests at heart. I celebrated my wins, no matter how small, without comparing myself to Ian or anyone else. A year later, I moved into a small apartment that was fully mine. I kept a framed photo of my childhood home on a shelf, not as a reminder of what was stolen, but as a marker of how far I had come. I started journaling daily, recording not only my past pain, but my ongoing victories. Each entry reinforced the reality that my life was mine to shape. I wouldn't like the anger hasn't disappeared completely. It surfaces sometimes, sharp and bitter. But now, it fuels me rather than paralyzes me. It's a reminder of my resilience, of how I refuse to let Ian define my existence. Looking back, the lessons are painful but invaluable. I learned that love isn't always given. Sometimes it has to be recognized for what it isn't, and survival sometimes means walking away. I learned that betrayal can shatter you, but it can also awaken a strength you never knew you had. And most importantly, I learned that reclaiming your life isn't about revenge, it's about reclaiming yourself. Today, I'm not just surviving. I'm thriving. I have a career I'm proud of, friendships I cherish, and a sense of peace I never thought I'd have. My past isn't gone, but it no longer controls me. Every day, I remind myself I am not nothing. I am everything they tried to erase, and I am still standing. I still hear whispers from the past sometimes, reminders of what Ian tried to do. But now, instead of fear, I feel something else triumph. Brutal, hard-won, undeniable triumph. And for the first time in my life, I can finally